Essentially, what we have here is we have our first steering committee. Some of you were a part of that, and we spoke about different priorities, different sites in terms of access and restoration and dams. We then further refined that into the next iteration of it, which some of you might have been on that call. And then the last call that we had in June is when we kind of reconfigured the map in order to orient it to the actual river. And what we had done during the last call was we shared both the kind of overall approach that we were taking, but also then spoke through some of these individual parcels or different individual like town level possible projects. And this is what we will be talking through today in a bit more detail. And today we've included some photos of these sites, since I know that probably a lot of us have been deep in this for a while, but some of you might be new to it. So we have some photos today. And then just a reminder that a lot of this work is building on the previous studies, and that we're kind of constantly going back and forth and checking, what came up in some of the earlier municipal reports, regional reports, historic documents, and making sure that we're building on that. And then in addition to some of the actual kind of site-specific things that we're doing in terms of looking at access, we're also trying to think about more what are these kind of like river typologies or typical conditions that you find along the river. In terms of some places we have a really wide river, some places it's really rocky, some places we have eroding edges, and just understanding like what might be the general opportunities for restoration along the larger length of the river. And so we're doing that hand in hand as we're trying to also be focusing in on more specific sites where there's opportunities for access and restoration. And so that's been the overall approach that we're taking. And our hope for today is to be able to go through some of these more individual kind of municipality scale projects. And really, our main goal is to start to narrow in on around 5 of these projects that we will be able to move forward into the next stage of design and planning, depending on the scale at which we are kind of looking at those possible projects. So that's the overall approach. And I will go back now into the presentation, but folks are welcome to follow along in the larger map if that's helpful. Before I go forward, any kind of questions about the kind of goals for today or the process that we've been going through in so far? Or does that all seem clear? I think a lot of you have been part of this, so you're probably familiar with it. So, but feel free to raise your hand or jump in at any moment. Go ahead, Steph.
Oh, I think Ryan came off of mute. Am I
great.
right? No, sorry. No.
Okay.
I might have, but it was completely accidentally.
Okay, excellent. Well, feel free to jump in at any point. Okay, excellent. So also during the last steering committee meeting, we used the Mentimeter in order to just kind of check of like what are some projects that were rising to the top for different folks on the call. And we use this, and I'll return back to this later on when we talk about essentially the kind of prioritization kind of criteria that we're trying to develop. But essentially, this was a helpful step in the process. And we began to think through, like, how do we begin to understand how that ranks in terms of high, medium, and low? So like I said, we'll return to this when we talk about the prioritization. And then we asked if there were any specific projects that anybody felt like they'd really like to see move forward. And we, of course, heard different things from different folks who are working on different parts of the river. And it was helpful to see just kind of what the conversation was. And quite a few, like these ones here in green, spoke about like, how do we move projects forward where we think we have existing partners or there's momentum on them? And so that was something that came out of it, was like, who's already doing this work in the communities, and where and how can the project that we're doing either build on that or momentum, and also help provide the momentum, right, in order to help move that work forward. So that was kind of the process that we've been going through up until now. And now I just want to step through and talk through some of these different projects in a bit more detail, because I feel like it's, like I said, we've had our heads in this for a long time, but I know that some of you have not. And so I think in order to be able to talk about prioritization, it might just be helpful for us to look at some photos and talk through the different possible projects. And so my thought is we could talk through that and then talk through the prioritization, and that'll be the hope. But like I said, feel free to jump in at any point if you have any questions. And we have edited this slightly based since the last steering committee meeting, just based on some of the feedback that we received during that call. So in Worcester, some of the key projects that we were thinking about is the possibility of restoring the Blackstone River's immediate headwaters, including addressing invasive species and expanded flood storage of the Middle River Park through wetland restoration. That is this area right here. The possibility of providing river access at the visitor center seemed to be really important, because right now you can't access the river until pretty much you can't access it up there near the visitor center. You have to access it further down, actually in Millbury. And so is there opportunity as part of the visitor center to provide access there? And this also is obviously in Worcester, an environmental justice community where there's not currently river access. And then as part of this project, and for those of you who were on the call this morning, you'll see that there is some overlap where we are talking about some aspects of this where it does cross over with possible the conversations around the dams as well. And so for those of you who might not know it, there are actually two dams right here in Worcester. The Quinsigamon Pond Dam is the kind of primary dam that holds back water for the Middle River Park. And then there's a second small structure here below that that is the one that we're talking about, not the one that's actually creating the impoundment that's part of the park. And so the question of could there be potential access to the river here at the visitor center? There's maybe two different options. One could be this little parcel, which would be pretty tough because it's tight, but would be beneficial because it's right across from the parking area. And the other that might be a bit more feasible is this area that is below the underpass underneath the Cone Road. And so just trying to understand those possibilities and the next steps for this. And here's some photos of what this looks like on the ground. Here we have this is the small dam right here. Unfortunately, the tree is blocking it, so you can't totally tell, but you can see it's a very low head dam. Here's the channelized conditions that are right underneath that underpass. And then here is a photo of what this parcel right here looks like. So it's currently just a kind of open meadow, but might make a really great opportunity for access and maybe expanded floodplain. And so the next steps that we're thinking about to understand whether even this is a project worth pursuing is in terms of the dam, we just need to determine the dam ownership. It's likely DCR. This is still kind of unknown, though. We need to research the south of the underpass to determine if it's a brownfield site and what the limitations might be of that, and then work with DCR to explore the possibility of adding access to that area. And so we'll get down to this later on when we talk about the prioritization, but I think this was a project that rose to the top just because of the opportunity for improved access in an area where there is not access, as well as it being in an environmental justice community, and the possibility that it could kind of be part of this combination of thinking about river access, possibility for restoration, and also addressing a dam. So this was a project that did rise to the top. So I'm going to pause here just to see if anybody has any questions about this possible project or suggestions of what things we might need to consider or look into, or issues that you see with this project.
I might just mention that one other element here is we were recently reached out to by Representative Mary Keefe, who represents Worcester area, and she asked if we had anything that was in the Worcester-Millbury area that we could potentially put in for as part of the state environmental bond bill request. And so there's a pending request right now that would fund a feasibility study of this work. I'm not sure if that will go through or not, so we're still waiting on that. But hopefully, if we do get that funding, we'd be able to perform this feasibility study and really understand what the history of the site is, the brownfield, what we can excavate, what's really technically feasible here. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Okay. So I'll jump to the next one unless any other questions come up. Okay, so the next area is in Millbury, and you will notice that we roughly have divided these up by municipality. And this is intentional because as we move forward, our hope is that we're able to share some of these different possible priority projects with the different municipalities to think about how to move them forward. And so at this point, it made sense to divide them up roughly. In some places, you'll see there's overlap between multiple municipalities, but right now, that's how we're roughly dividing it up. So in Millbury, the main kind of opportunity seems to be improving access. And so this includes formalizing a portage out of the river at the cemetery, which is right here, if you could see my cursor, because there's currently rapids right here and right here. And so if you're paddling downstream, it's an area that unless you have very good skills, paddling skills, it's important that people portage the rapids. And so we've been kind of figuring out with the city of the town of like, is there the opportunity for creating a more formal access here at the cemetery? And then in terms of being able to put back in the river and also just provide a kind of general access point within the town of Millbury, there's an existing site right here we're calling it's the Veterans of Foreign Wars parcel. There's already an existing little parking area, and it's right adjacent to the water, and the town is very open to the possibility of providing access at the site. And one great thing about this site is that it could be a place where we look at like what a typical access site might look like. So whether that's steps, how we deal with kind of addition of new steps that are adjacent to an eroding slope, because we have an eroding slope right here. And so one of the benefits of looking at this site is that while it can be specific to the VFW site and be able to use then for permitting and moving forward with it, it also could provide a kind of typical condition that we could look at then for other sites as well. And we could create a rendering and drawings that would allow for us to be able to think both at the specifics of the site, but also more generally. Also working with the town and the National Grid to establish improved short-term portage and signage at the Millbury Electric. So the Millbury Electric Dam is right here. And right now there is, in the past when we ported the dam, we just pretty much like walk over the front face of the dam, which is only possible when there's low flow conditions. And so in the short term, how do we just improve portage? And then long term, how do we, there's been previous conversations about the removal of Millbury Electric Dam. And so how can we re-explore that? And for those of you who were on the call this morning with Jonas from doing the H&H study, that's one of the things that is being studied as part of the H&H study, to be able to better understand what removal might look like. And then also just kind of going back into the decision that was made, or the lack of decision that was made in terms of the removal, and trying to understand whether there's the opportunity to move that forward. So in terms of next steps for this, there's actually a portage cleanup this Friday. Contact Steph if you'd like to help out. We are assuming that this is one of those projects that will rise to the top as a priority project. And so our hope is to develop plans for access at the VFW site to create this kind of typical access point. And then working with the town and the cemetery commission to allow portage improvements at the cemetery ahead of those rapids. And here you could see this lower right-hand image is how we currently portage the dam. And then the kind of upper one here is the kind of eroding slope at the VFW site. So just some photos of what those existing conditions are. So this is, like I said, Millbury's really we're focusing on access here. That seems to be one of the greatest opportunities and needs in this community. But I'll pause here to see if there's any questions that anybody has about any of these possible projects here in Millbury.
So this might not be, I might be off base thinking about it this way. But Peter and I went and I went and visited on Lake Quinsigamon, DCR put in a new stormwater treatment for the parking lot, and it's like a demonstration project for like steep slopes,
Oh, cool.
like doing um, and just when you were showing these pictures and talking about the VFW, I wonder if that would be kind of like you could incorporate a, stormwater treatment, and
Mhm.
they were doing steps as well. And
Mhm.
so that's what made me think of it as maybe it could be like a multiple
Yeah.
things at once, like a stormwater treatment on a steep slope plus the steps and
Yep.
for the
Absolutely.
future.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Heather. I think that it's important that we, think for any of these access sites, I think really thinking about it a bit more like holistically of just like our hope is not just to like put in some granite steps, but actually to think about that whole sloped edge condition. And I think that it would be great to actually, maybe I could follow up with you and find out more about where exactly that site is that you're mentioning, because it would be great to check it out to see how they approached it in terms of addressing the erosion and all those other issues.
Yeah, it's right at the parking lot for the where the sailing program is. So,
Okay,
but
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. No, that seems like a really good precedent. So great. Peter, I think Peter, you're muted, but yeah, there you go. Great.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yep.
Okay. The electric dam, is
Yeah.
there any public access besides coming in by canoe? Is Mass Electric okay with that? Coming in by car, is there any parking or how would you access it if not by boat?
Yeah, that's a good question, Peter. So there technically is an access road on River left in order to maintain the power lines, but National Grid feels uncomfortable with people accessing that. They're just too close to the high tension lines. And so there wouldn't be public access to like park and get in the river here. This wouldn't be a point where we would necessarily recommend people should start their paddle. It's more of being able to continue downriver and get around the dam. And as an emergency, if you needed to get out of the river here, there's a walking path that you can get to the back of the National Grid um, area and get to the road. But it would really be more of an emergency access than a yes, we welcome you to kind of come this way access, if that makes sense.
Great. And then, but the one at the VFW would be more of a kind of be able to park your car, put your boat in there. I think then the big issue is that the Millbury Electric, if we go back to the map, you'll see that the Millbury Electric comes not short after, right? So if you put in right at the VFW site here, I think it's, very shortly that you are then confronted with the Millbury Electric Dam. And so that's one of the reasons why a portage around there is key if we want to be promoting access within Millbury, which is a really beautiful stretch of the river downstream of the Millbury Electric as well. So
And it's nice because we have really great connections with the town of Millbury, and they have a trails committee. And Bruce from their trails committee has been very, very active in stewarding and maintaining a lot of these sites. He's the one that is organizing the cleanup. He's the one that's been working directly with National Grid. So that's why this is one site that has sort of moved forward on its own, is because we have this local volunteer. You can see him in the top right picture there, who has met with us several times and said, like, what's happening? Let's go, let's go. So that's why we're doing the cleanup tomorrow.
And I think as we, at the end of the conversation today, we'll be talking about prioritization. And I think that that is something that's really risen to the top as one of the key things for us in terms of prioritizing projects is like, where do we have local champions and local support for this? And I think this is a great example where there seems to be that opportunity both to kind of work closely with the municipality, local kind of champions, as well as provide this kind of typical access site design. So this is definitely one that we feel is rising to the top for us. Okay, excellent. I'll go forward unless there's any other questions. Moving down into Sutton, this is a project that is hold on, the Tri-Park Portage. This is right around Singing Dam for any of you who have paddled the river. And one of the goals here is to improve safety and access at the Tricentennial Park. And that includes replacing the dam ahead and the portage signs and adding safety buoys. Additionally, we're actively working with the town to improve visibility of the portage while also improving accessible pathways at the park. And so here you'll see, this is just a kind of bird's eye view of this, but here's the Singing Dam, and then the portage is right here. And it's actually one of the better portages that exist, or maybe I'd say it's probably like the best, like most formal portage that exists along the river. And it's adjacent. Here's the Tricentennial Park. There's this parking area. There's some nice signage and kind of historic artifacts that were preserved on the site. But some of you may have visited, and what the photo here on the left is the condition that it was in. And then on the crew here, you could see John and others went out to the site. Bonnie and the collaborative all went out to the site and did a pretty amazing cleanup of it. And so just in terms of, so this is one of those projects that's a bit more short term, but at least it's something that is immediately visible, that's happening, that's kind of growing out of the work that we're doing as part of thinking about access along the river. The town has now a contractor to improve pedestrian walkways and site maintenance, thinking about ongoing volunteers to maintain the vegetation. So, we have John and the Friends of the Blackstone down in the southern portion of the river that kind of are doing a lot of that, but just thinking about like how do we get volunteers involved in that northern portion? How do we think about funding or installing a larger dam ahead sign? It's right now like about this size. And so it's great if you're close to the dam, but obviously better to see those far before. And also the portage signs. And then figuring out how do we what is the pathway to installing safety buoys and addressing erosion at the bottom of the put-in. And here you can see this is just north of the dam in the impoundment. This was the conditions prior, and then upper right photo, and then the lower is after the town's improvements. And then this is the erosion issues at the base of the kind of access ramp that we meant on that point number 5. And so this is one of those projects that is kind of exciting because it's happening. It's, and it's, kind of immediately an improvement that can be made on the river. So just thinking about these different timescales of projects, it's nice to have some of these ones that are directly kind of immediately possible. And this is one of those that the collaborative has been moving forward with and made major improvements on. So that's Sutton. Any questions on this one before we jump ahead? Nope. Okay, then moving ahead, we have the Grafton Tri-Village revisioning. So for those of you who've been working on the river a long time, you know that there's been kind of multiple iterations of visions that have been developed for this area. So just thinking about where and how do we update and collaborate with Grafton to establish this clear connection between the Tri-Villages area with open space, river access, river connectivity, and placemaking between Saundersville, Farnhamsville, Fisherville, et cetera. So there's some great documents that came out of earlier kind of visioning for the river. So what is it that we actually need to do in order to move that work forward as part of what we're asking for this? And so thinking about how we could work with Grafton on land use redevelopment at the Fishermill and site and the dam to include portage improvements, explore reestablishing the Living Systems Lab and or habitat restoration at the Mill Village Park. And then thinking about the opportunity for protection of open space and trail systems along the river, including building from Grafton Land Trust land at Farnhamsville Dam and its historic impoundment. And then there's some other priority projects that have come up through our conversations with the municipality, which is, if you look down here, for those of you who might not be familiar, here's the Grafton Dam right here. Here's the Fisherville Dam. And so this area right here is the redevelopment parcel. This here is Mill Villages Park. And there's also additional parcels that down here that are town-owned and that they are interested in thinking about, what that could look like in terms of restoration and access. And this is also an important site because it is also the kind of headquarters of the Nipmuc Nation, who, as many of you know, are close partners on this project. And here's just an aerial just showing that relationship between Fisherville Dam, the redevelopment site, Mill Villages Park, and then the Farnhamsville Dam, and just thinking about what connectivity could look like in this area. And so, like I mentioned, it's there's been a lot of conversations around this, so just trying to understand like what can we do as part of this project to help advance that. And so some of the next steps and questions we have are, just following up with the town and Jean about current work proposed for the Fisherville redevelopment site, following up about the Living Systems Lab and what the status of it, and ensure that portage is being considered as part of the plans for the dam and the redevelopment site. So the town also recently hired an engineer to do a feasibility study on the Fisherville Dam. And we just want to make sure that any conversations around that dam are considering what portage could look like, because that's an important, because the portage there is quite bad right now. And so that's one of the possible sites that kind of feels like it could be, both a kind of larger, almost kind of thinking about that whole reach of the river and where and how like more of a connected open space and access areas could be created there, and just trying to build on some of the previous work that has been done here. So I'll pause for a moment here and just see if there's any questions about this here. And I know, Peter, I know that you've been working closely on this. And so I think, we would hope, if we choose to move forward with any of these projects that, we would, of course, reach out and hope to work closely with you or others in this area to figure out how to move this work forward.
I would just maybe mention quickly that we also know that Jean Barnett, who's the owner of the Fisherville site, would be a really key partner, and we have reached out to him as well to be involved in this and make sure that, again, we're building from everything that's been done before.
Okay, moving down the river, thinking about North Bridge and specifically thinking about floodplain and riparian conservation within this area. So just think about the opportunity to conserve and restore riparian corridor and floodplains, and think about public access. Some of the different potential projects within this portion of the North Bridge portion of the river that have come up is the possibility of land protection of floodplain at the Curtain Factory and adding new formal public access for pedestrian and paddlers. This is actually the stretch of the river that's the longest where we don't have any access to the river. And so this would be kind of like a potential access point. Researching existing agreement to allow public access at one of the landfills, the landfill junkyard right here. Thinking about the School Street property, which is a town conservation priority. Supporting expansion of the Quaker Street landfill capping between the existing cap and the river within the floodplain. Owner there is already exploring public access. We have the opportunity to partner, to influence or help to support that final design in terms of, ensuring access, and then improving hydrological connection by repairing canal river breach south of Plummer's Landing on the DCR property, which is across from the landfill. And this is pending grant decision, which would fund the feasibility study. And this is something also that was brought up during the morning meeting because Jonas and the Horsley Witten team is doing the H&H study to better understand what that would mean in terms of the potential to think about that breach and how it would affect the hydrology and hydraulics on the river. So that is the North Bridge section, and then just some photos of this. Here we have. This is the kind of stretch of river. I'm pretty sure this is the Curtain Factory building on the left or right around that area. And then this is the photos of the landfill. And so just some next steps or questions that we have on this in terms of moving forward to figure out if it is a feasible project is just researching existing agreement to allow for public access at the junkyard, working with the town to identify and pursue funding for conservation, and inclusion of the future plans, and then following up with the Quaker landfill owners to support access as part of the cleanup and capping process. And then, like I mentioned, just waiting to hear back from EEA on the dam and seawall grant for feasibility study at the canal breach. And so for those of you who might have been on the river, paddle the river, this is a portion of the river that often goes dry because the water is split between the canal and the river. So just trying to understand those hydraulics better. Questions on this one? No? Okay. Jumping ahead, oops, Uxbridge. This is also kind of similar to Northbridge. This is the more remote, wild sections of the river. So mostly thinking about floodplain and riparian conservation. So thinking about expanding existing protected open space between the river and Route 122 behind the high school and Route 16, which could be included as part of kind of educational interpretation opportunities. The Skull Rock access site has a lot of erosion along the edge. So just thinking about and the steps end and then the river's down there. So just thinking about how do we help improve some of those access sites. Exploring open space at River Road, including for both greenway and bike path expansion. River Road also offers an opportunity to explore stormwater management and options to improve water quality. So that is down here. And then working with local industries and businesses to potentially create new access points on land, but that is unprotected. And so I think that is kind of this thinking about this segment right here. And this is right here is where the current greenway ends. And so this to me, becomes an opportunity for us to think about where and how this might also overlap with some of the planning work that's happening around the greenway, in order to think about if there's that opportunity for, kind of improving connectivity beyond that endpoint, and also conservation. So that came up during the conversations with the town. And so just trying to figure out how we can move that forward and potentially zoom into this area to better understand that opportunity. Okay, moving forward. Just next questions on this is just working with the town to identify and pursue funding for conservation, inclusion, future plans, submitting technical assistance to requests to funders to advance planning of the river road management, in terms of conservation access, and then connecting with the local businesses about access. So part of that will just be about reaching out to see where there might be people who are receptive or businesses that are receptive to thinking through access here. Okay, excellent. Moving forward to the Blackstone stretch of the river. This is also an area that has been looked at extensively. So once again, trying to build on some of those previous efforts and think about the opportunities for placemaking and this kind of regional wide vision for river access and restoration between Blackstone and North Smithfield and Woonsocket, because they're all kind of combined in this area. So thinking about, the possibility of formally protecting open space and creating access behind apartment buildings that connect to the Blackstone Gorge, activating placemaking in the public square at Brick Block along the river as part of the Canal Street Bridge renovation, improving portage around the Saranac Dam, exploring the river walk south of the dam on River Right, continuing restoration and conservation of Mammoth Mills Park, including exploration of daylighting portions of the canal, creating a paddling route, removing invasive vegetation. There's already a lot of great momentum on this, so how can we support that? Exploring restoration of the floodplain and floodway, including adding public access at existing junkyard, which currently the water runs off the junkyard into the river, and then potential open space protection and new river access along Tupperware Mill or as part of the 146 bridge renovation area. So just looking at this here, some of these different, so here we have this line through the middle is the border between Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And so just it seemed like there's a cluster of projects in this area that seem to be all kind of could potentially align in terms of thinking more broadly about connectivity in this area. And so just trying to understand where and how we can kind of build on that work, go back and revisit some of the previous plans and kind of help to create what could be that kind of vision for this whole area in terms of thinking about connectivity and access along the river. But it's by far, for me, it's one of the more beautiful segments of the river. The gorge is stunning. There's already so much great public access that is created here along the river, and that's been part of the Greenway expansion. And so just trying to figure out where and how do we begin to understand all these as kind of these interconnected efforts, and where can we help to draw and help people to visualize and understand that idea of it being a more interconnected system of open space and of access sites. So that is, this is the, Blackstone North, kind of that North Smithfield area. Yes. So the next steps are to gain a better understanding of the town's priorities here. figuring out which projects are most feasible, what potential next steps and funding opportunities might exist, and then build on from ongoing efforts such as the Friends of the Blackstone and the Historic Commission cleanups, especially at the Mammoth Mill sites, which is quite a stunning site that a lot of folks have been working to clean up. And so just understanding where and how that fits within the kind of larger interconnected open space network that is developing within this area. Pause there for a moment if there's any questions.
Yeah, Emily, I had a quick question about
Yep.
the open space behind the apartments. I was under the impression that that land was under a conservation easement. Sounds like I'm wrong.
Well, let's see. There's if I'm not mistaken, yeah, this is just turned sideways to fit on the 8.5 by 11 sheet, but here,
Yeah.
this is state-owned property here. I am not familiar with what was interesting in exploring it, and I would love any connections that folks have, because I feel like this area specifically right here, I'll go to the aerial. I think it'll be easier to see there. This is an old ball field right here that is this kind of meadowy area. And there was a lot of people walking around. And so it feels like it is conserved and that there is access. And maybe that's just for the apartment owners, but or apartment residents. But I would, if that's true, or it's something that's great to hear that you've heard of that, Kate, because it's something that I would love to look into more detail to understand if that is the case.
So the first thing I would suggest, and the reason why I think there's a conservation easement there, I don't remember if I worked on this application or not, like a long time ago, but if you look at the Rhode Island DEM, because it is in Rhode Island, if you look at the approved plans, sometimes in order to concentrate development in one area, there'll be requirements that, the rest of the property will be held in a conservation easement. I definitely would defer to a land use lawyer because I'm not sure if it's conservation easement for use of lessees, which feels sort of disingenuous. That's still private property, right? Or if it's just something to preclude development, like you can't develop here or something. But yeah, it was my understanding that it was protected in some way, but maybe talking with folks at DEM might be a good first step.
That's excellent. Thanks for that. No, we'll definitely look into it because, like I said, there's trails through there. There's people, when I went to check it out, there were tons of people walking there. And so I just don't know how formal that is or informal. And it would be great to find out because if it is actually, open to the public, it's just a really remarkable area along the river. That'd be great to be able to think about as we communicate about areas to visit.
Yeah, this was a site for the Greenway Challenge a couple of years ago. Well, probably more than a couple of years ago too, like a decade ago.
Nice. Yeah, that's excellent. Patty, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that area that you're talking about. You said it's kind of meadowy. I remember Donna Kayla mentioning this park site called the Meadows in North Smithfield. That sounds like in that general area.
Okay.
So maybe reaching back out to our friend Donna Kayla and she might know something about it because I think she did work for the town at some point as recycling coordinator. And the other thing is that I'm just wondering about a lot of that area behind those apartments. Having lived in Blackstone and having been on the train, a lot of that area the train passes through. There are railroad tracks back in there, but I'm not sure how far. But I remember going through Blackstone and being able to see people's backyards. So you might need to work with whatever the current train, Genesee and whatever it is, that you might need to pull them in as well as part of the discussion.
I think the train line actually comes, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but I think it comes, or that's the Greenway here, right? Or no, there's that the Greenway. There's the Greenway right here. And the train is, one of these lines is the train line. I don't know if there's a train in here, but definitely that's something we'll check out if we zoom into this area.
Yeah, well, I know the train goes through Blackstone, and I do know it. Like I said, I would hear it every night when I lived in Blackstone at certain times. But also on the Polar Express, we often encourage people to decorate in that area because we could see their backyards. And
very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Okay, excellent. Well, that's all helpful, and we'll definitely follow up to find out more about the conservation easement and get a better understanding of all that here. Then moving down to Woonsocket, here thinking about access and restoration. One of the main projects here is just thinking about portage around Thunder Mist Dam, specifically up the possibility upstream on River Left at Phyllis H. Thompson Park. And then just thinking about the conditions at River Edge Park, but also a couple of other sites. And I was looking back through the Woonsocket plan, and I did notice that they specifically also in Woonsocket, we're talking about some of the parcels adjacent to the Blackstone River and improving them. And so I think it's just something for us to think about within this area along the river and where and how that could be improved. So so here, just in terms of the Phyllis H. Thompson Park, this is that parcel. Here's Thunder Mist Dam, and it's something that, you know, this is one of those projects that I would appreciate any thoughts on how best to approach this. You know, part of me, I think we've been struggling a little bit to meet with the Woonsocket town and the planners there, and just because I think there's been a high turnover, and but just trying to understand whether it's something that we should hold off on and see if they're even interested in this discussion, or if it's worth exploring it in terms of thinking about drawings that could help to explore what this could look like, and then going to them with like a possibility of like, hey, could we reimagine this? And so just for reference, here we have the Thunder Mist Dam, and here's some photos. This is the current Phyllis, the park right here on the lower left that you can see. There's this parking area. It currently is stepped down, and so there would be a need and opportunity to think about probably a ramp or something that could come through this area, but it could be a great possibility for creating access right here in the city. Here you could see it from the bridge, what it looks like. It's just a kind of currently a kind of crumbling wall, but that could be easily kind of redesigned and reimagined in order to provide access there. And then just this middle one right here is a photo upstream where we currently are trying to portage when we go around that dam, which is quite challenging because there's pretty steep riprap walls that go all the way down to the river up until this point. And so this is also one of those sites where the portage is really challenging. And so so just thinking about ways that it can be improved, but also provide an additional access site and kind of celebrate the water and the river right there in town. So go ahead, Patty.
This area at one time was a launch for the Riverboat Explorer.
Okay.
We had temporary type docks, the rubber docks, similar to what we have pull out during the dragon boat races. And at one time there was discussion between Bob, when he was still with the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council, and former mayor, I can't remember her last name. She's running for city council, not very popular, but there was some discussion about re-putting in a ramp there. And it kind of fell through. I did broach the subject with my contact at NeighborWorks, Megan Rigo, who I've sent that contact information to Stephanie and Kaylee. And she said it's pretty much dead in the water, but maybe reapproaching it as more of what you're talking about, maybe better suited for that spot than have full-fledged boat ramp type thing for the Explorer. And again, Margot Morisseau, she's with Human Resources at the city. Folks that I talked to when I was at the Levitt Amp concert agreed with me that she would be the best person to try to reach out to in the city. She had been on a leave of absence or away for a bit, but I'm pretty sure she may be back in the office now. And I can try to get her contact information and forward that along to you and Stephanie.
Yeah, I happened to be in Woonsocket the other day, and so I just stopped by just to see who was there. And what I heard that there's they have a planner sort of, but she's a contract planner, so she only works a couple hours a week and wouldn't be the right kind of person to speak to. We talked to her really early on in this process. But I guess everything in planning, because they don't have a current real planner, is going through the mayor's office, which was surprising to hear. So basically, she recommended that we reach out to her. She's like an administrative assistant researcher. Her name is Thea. So I think we're going to be just reaching out and trying to just get a meeting, whether it's with the mayor or with someone else. And I agree, Emily, I think having a really targeted conversation of this is our specific idea and this is how it might work versus like with all of our other communities, we've said, what are your priorities? What do you want to work on? They're just not quite ready to to have that kind of big picture conversation.
Yeah, I would also reach out to NeighborWorks folks because they've been very active with, like they just opened up affordable housing behind Museum of Work and Culture. And they also do a lot with the city and as far as planning and working with and bringing things to the community. So I think they could be a good advocate to work with for you on this.
Great. Thanks, Patty. That's super helpful. Yeah. I do think, and I just kind of picking up on that, I think this might be one of those projects. I think in a lot of places, we've been fortunate that the municipalities have been very willing to work with us. And then we could be like, what about this idea? What about that idea? And this might be one where like a nice rendering of this, what it could be, might be what it takes to help them to share a vision, right, of what could be here. And so so this is one of those municipalities that feels like it might require just a slightly different approach, but where if it feels like a project that we think is important, that it might be that we think about how we can move it forward in a slightly different way. So go ahead, John.
I was supposed to have a meeting with the mayor. I got his cell phone number and they said, call him and we'll set up a meeting. And the day that I called him, they had like a hostage situation and he couldn't talk. So I still got to reach out to him because I was going to talk to him about the water goat and things like that, but we could make it a multi-topic meeting.
Great. Excellent. That sounds great, John. Is your desire to meet with him, is it time sensitive? Is it like an immediate thing, or is it something where it could happen as when kind of this gets a little bit further along?
Yeah, well, we could meet separately. I could just text him and say, when would you be available instead of going through his scheduler or
Okay.
whatever.
Awesome. Well, let's follow up on that, John, and maybe Patty, we can kind of think about the best strategy and best approach with that. But that's definitely nice to have the cell phone number in order to think about how to
You
schedule.
can't hide. Did you notice that? Well, before when I went to that city hall, every door was locked and the mayor was upstairs, like untouchable.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, that'd be great. I think any help, there would be helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah, Chris, the new mayor, Chris Beauchamp, he seems to be very approachable. I don't know, John, if you get that feeling, but I've gotten that feeling at a couple of events I've been to at the Museum of Work and Culture where he's been present. And I haven't seen him at 11 Amp concert, but again, I still think having a presence during one of the concerts before the end with a table or something, there's a lot of people that show up there that's involved in the city. And I just think it would be very useful.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And this Friday is one of their most popular bands that are performing. Why can't I think of their name? They're a Rhode Island band and I can never think of their name. But this is like they performed almost every 11 Amp, but they tend to bring a good crowd to the event. But that might be short notice to set up a table for. But I think the concerts run through about the end of August or mid-August. So there's still a few weeks left.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll follow up with you, Patty, about that. But I agree. I think that just building some momentum around it in the town would be good. So that's great. Awesome. That's super helpful, both in terms of understanding some of the historic context around the site and also context the city. Great. Moving forward, thinking about Manville, just thinking about improving public access opportunities, so improving the portage around the Manville Dam, exploring opportunities at Sycamore Landing to be a pilot site for riparian restoration, Indigenous education, really just working on all the great work you're doing, John. Thinking about the loop trail between Manville Dam and Albion, and then improving the portage around Ashton Dam from the river into the canal banks. And so just thinking, so here's just some photos. This is upstream of the Manville Dam. I think is that photo where you can't even really see that it's coming. And so just in general, I think one of the things we're trying to understand is like, how do we add safety buoys to make sure that things are visible for just paddler safety? here's a photo of the Manville Dam, and I don't have an actual photo. So for those of you who may or may not know the Manville Dam, there's a great portage on river left, but it only allows for you to get out. There's a kind of floating dock, I think, if I remember correctly, but there's no way to get back in. And so for when you're paddling and needing to just portage the dam, it's challenging because you either have to carry your boat across the bridge, or there is a good takeout on river right, but there's not a good way to put back in. And so just thinking about where and how we could improve the portage there. And then also just, John, I think you and I have been talking about like where and how do we get permitting? How do we think about the possibility for moving some of the work forward that we've been discussing at Sycamore Landing? And so those are some of those possibilities here in Manville. Moving downstream, we have Pratt Dam and Superfund site placemaking. So just working with the Friends of the Blackstone, Town of Cumberland, and EPA to design public access, open space, and riparian restoration at the OU2 Superfund site, and explore the opening of the tubes to improve public safety at the Pratt Dam. Some of you who were on the call this morning might recall this conversation. In terms of next steps, there's actually an upcoming public meeting this Monday at 6 o'clock. Would love for everybody to come out to be part of the kind of visioning of what could this be. The goal of the meeting is to identify community priorities for reuse if ownership allows. There's a big question about ownership right now of who's going to take ownership of the site. And I think one of our roles right now is just advocating that it be public and doesn't just have a fence around it, because it is quite a remarkable site. Steph and I had the opportunity to actually go visit it a couple months ago, and it really provides, both a unique experience of being able to be up high and look out over the river because of the height of the landfill site. And also just an opportunity for improved portage around Pratt Dam. Here you could see the tubes. This is from a couple years ago, and you could see the debris that's collected behind them, which is part of what a major risk is in terms of the deaths that have taken place here. And so, the goal here is, one part is just like, how do we make sure that this is public, because it is a quite remarkable large site on the river, and then separately but also connected is how can we address the tubes and portage around Pratt Dam, because right now the portage is really, really not great, and anybody who's paddling runs the risk of not knowing where to portage, how to portage, and then coming up against a really dangerous situation in the tube. So that's this work. Steph, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say, as part of the capping of that landfill, there was an agreement that they are required to create an emergency river access point. And so if there was something that happened, they can get like an ambulance or something down to the river. So again, this just really reinforces this need to make it public, because it's there, it should be used, it should improve public safety. And if we can come to an agreement on who the owner of the property would be in order to allow that reuse, that would absolutely be one element of it, is having this really easy portage on the bikeway, basically pre-built in. We just need to we have to make sure it's not just fenced in.
Mm-hmm.
So we would love you to participate in that meeting and advocate for that.
I was down there recently, and the buoys going across the dam had broken because the way they redirected the river, there's a lot more water flow coming from the right side of the river now. So I brought down like 4 new buoys for them to add to the buoy line, and they reinstalled it with just the 3 buoys that are left, and there's big gaps in between the buoys. So, it's not really jumping out at you saying do not cross, like if it had a series of buoys going across. And I think they should redo it because it's kind of, it's not 100%.
I would definitely bring that up on Monday. You'll have the right people in the room to hear you out.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. And I think on this project, it's like so many of these, we have to like understand like what is the least thing that has to happen for safety, right? And that is like, let's make sure there's buoys so people know that there's danger. Then the next step up is like, let's provide a good access for emergency vehicles. Then the next step is let's actually provide a good access so people don't get into emergencies and they know to portage right there. And then the ideal situation is that the whole site is made publicly accessible. And so I think with all these projects, we're trying to understand and like be kind of like strategic and like, okay, let's aim for the big stuff and the big goals. And then let's also understand what those other scenarios could be in order to, just try to advocate for the greatest opportunities, but also make sure that we're covering the baseline of what's needed for safety.
Yeah, I've seen people fishing there. It's also a great wildlife viewing site. I remember being on the bike path, and behind the fence there were 4 deer, and I was joking with my friend saying, "Oh, look at it, it's Blackstone Valley Zoo," because they were behind the fence, which is what we don't want. But it seems to be a location where you can see a lot of wildlife, from deer to maybe great blue herons and turtles and frogs and all kinds of stuff. It's just, one of those neat spots for,
definitely.
So it definitely should have public access. I do plan on being at the meeting on Monday.
Great. Thanks, Patty. That's so funny you said that, because I would say that the wetland that they're creating is part of this. I think maybe Steph and I even said it to each other when the site visit. It felt like a zoo. I totally agree with what you said. Like I expected to see like, giraffes and elephants walking around, because it was this whole weirdly constructed wetland condition. So I think it has the potential to be really beautiful and a really wonderful habitat when it's grown in. Like they've done a lot of planting, and so we'll see. But I think the key will be, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to have public access there for for all those reasons. So. Excellent. Moving down, we have Lonsdale Marsh, thinking about access and restoration. So thinking about comprehensively protecting the edges of the Lonsdale Valley Falls Marsh, including opening access of capped landfill sites potentially with elevated causeway into unique habitat, and expand open space protection. And then explore I think there's conversations about the revitalization of Valley Falls Heritage Park. But right now there's not portage or fish passage that's considered as part of that. And especially when it comes to portage, just trying to figure out how to advocate for that, because right now there's, as some of you might know, there's good access out at Valley Falls, at the landing there. Central Falls, thank you, Central Falls Landing, but there's not a good way to get back in. So understanding, with portaging, you have to have both. It only works so well if you have good, on one side of the dam, you have to have it on the downside of the dam as well. So, and then just in terms of Lonsdale Marsh, I think part of it is maybe just also thinking about like, fingers crossed, the fish passage project moves forward. And so how do we begin to think about that like larger restoration of the marsh to become really wonderful spawning habitat for hopefully our new visitors. So here just this is the causeway here and the old ball fields. So in terms of next steps here is okay, why is it doing that? Gaining a better understanding of the history of the city dump and previous discussions about its cleanup, what would be necessary and how to fund it, working with the various communities and state to support ongoing conservation efforts to enhance community stewardship and connection here. This is a bizarre area because it's actually like, I don't know how many, it's like 3 different towns that come together right here in Valley Falls, right? And so it's definitely crosses over a couple of the different municipalities and would require a coordinated effort. But here you could see some photos of, this is the causeway. And then if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the path down on that kind of southern edge where there is some protected, or there's some town-owned land there. So just trying to see where is there already existing opportunities in town-owned land to think about access there.
The bottom left is actually Central Falls, who's considering getting some sort of easement in order to protect that area.
Right here,
so there's a lot of opportunity in a lot of different ways here.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, that would be the
effort. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. That bottom edge.
Mm-hmm. Oops.
That's cool. I didn't know that causeway was there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, and we're trying to understand it a bit more. I know Kevin did some research into it, and we've spoken to DEM. It's listed on DEM's sort of GIS as publicly accessible land, but it's it's gated off, which feels like it's not publicly accessible, but it's obviously used. There are well-worn walking paths throughout. So we know that it was a historic dump. We're trying to figure out exactly what's there, what might be leaching into the river, what might be a health hazard, and what we could, what steps might be able to be taken in order to open it up to the public. But trying to wrap our head around it all.
Emily, can
Are
you
you
go back to the picture?
Oh.
The
These
picture of the
ones here?
Valley Falls Pond?
Oh, here. One. There we go. Yep.
Yeah, for anyone that doesn't know what it is, if you see the lines in the Valley Falls Pond, that's from the boat that sprayed the herbicide. Those are all the lines you took going back and forth.
Yeah.
For the invasive
Water
water
chestnuts.
chestnut. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that actually is open water.
It's open
Yeah.
water, yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Looks like you missed some.
I was amazed when we were there for the fish migration paddle this year at how much it's improved. I mean, there definitely was some scattered, but having seen it, 3 or 4 years ago when it was just chock full, it was pretty impressive. So, I think these questions of how do we manage invasives on the river is one of the bigger kind of higher level conversations when we're thinking about all of these adjacent parcels.
That old ball field, you're talking about that little area off of 122, correct? That's gated off. Yeah, before they gated it, well, I've been on down that path. I think I told you there was a heron rookery down facing, you get to the section where you're actually looking over towards the Central Falls Landing. And I actually also saw a great horned owl in there. So there's and I remember the Parks and Rec director at the time, who was staying at the hotel when I worked at the hotel, had talked about a lot of different things over there. I don't think he's the Parks and Rec director anymore. I don't even know if he's still around, but that's actually the town of Lincoln, Rhode Island, that area.
Yeah, there's this weird thing that happens where this is Lincoln, down here is Central Falls, over here is Cumberland, and so they all kind of come together right in the marsh. Yep.
A big parcel of it is also just DEM. Lincoln has pretty much that old ball field location, but the rest of the causeway, even jumping across the marsh, is DEM.
Oh, okay.
Excellent. So just moving forward, into the last segment is the Pawtucket access and riparian restoration, thinking about restoration intentional placemaking at Granite Park, really just kind of thinking about all the work that John and others are doing already there. Restoring the Tolman High School boardwalk was on our list, and I'll get into that a little more in the next slide. And then thinking about formalizing river access upstream of Slater Mill Dam, thinking about the fire department access, possible new access behind the city hall, and then also obviously the Fish Passage project. Oops, for some reason it keeps jumping ahead. Oops, go back. Here we go. So just in terms of next steps or questions, the high school is actually being relocated, is my understanding. So just trying to understand what the plan is for the property, because obviously we don't want to do a project. This is the photo of it right here. If we don't want to do something, if that is being relocated, and then just working with John and Kate on the permitting for Granite Park. Go ahead, John.
Yep, we're having a cleanup at Granite Park on Saturday, July 18th from 9 to noon time.
Awesome.
And we're going to be working on the 10-foot space between the fence and the river's edge.
Great.
Last I checked, we had 34 people signed up.
Amazing. Great. Patty?
Yeah, the plans. Recently, I just heard the plans for the high school. It looks like, and I don't know if this is official, but I just read somewhere that they're looking at housing potentially. But also that area by the high school too was where supposedly the proposed Greenway bikeway was supposed to continue from Kittacuck, because there is bikeway behind City Hall and the fire station. It goes from City Hall all the way up to the Veterans Memorial stage area.
Yeah.
So this bikeway, and it was supposedly that they had talked about continuing it either by Tolman High School or along the other side where the Christian church in that area back there, that's pretty much all owned by Louis Yip. So, but yeah, that's what I just heard. I just read that somewhere about housing as a potential, but like I said, I don't know how official that was. I don't know if it was like speculation that that would be a good thing to do with that high school and also the other high school that would be closing on the east, on the portion leading to the east side of Providence, Shea High School.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's helpful. And I think either way, there might be opportunities for thinking about that old boardwalk and that riparian edge right there. And so, yeah, so that's, I think we're obviously the town might be hesitant to move forward with anything until they figure out what the plan is. But and I think, John, you might mention that this was maybe part of some of the original ZAP work on the river as well. So it might be interesting to go back into the archives to see if we have photos of what it used to look like, just to understand that better. Okay, excellent. So that got us from all the way from north to south. And so one of the things, like I said, one of our goals is this is a lot of projects. And one of our goals moving forward with this NIFWIF work is to be able to select 5 of these that we're going to go into a greater level of detail on. And so one of the things that we discussed during the last call, and that I want to kind of revisit today is like, how do we now select these, what projects we should move forward with? And is there some sort of prioritization criteria, or how do, maybe not criteria, not that we want this to make the decision for us, but just maybe help us understand the decisions or the different factors that we might want to consider in. And so we internally went through a process of trying to kind of think through like what are the different criterias that we should potentially be using for selecting these sites moving forward. And this is very much a draft, but we just wanted to share with you all just to let's see, like for you all to see where we're at with it. Some of the different prioritization that came up was like thinking about, filling in the gaps and paddling safety. So like where do we have existing access on the river? Where do we have bad portages? And how do we prioritize those projects just in terms of safety? Which projects are either connecting to existing goals or previous plans, such as the needs assessment or local plans or these larger regional plans? Thinking about environmental justice communities and the need to, or opportunity and need to prioritize projects in those areas. Thinking about replicability. So which projects, because we can only select a couple of them, are there some projects that we could look at, but that's something that we develop for that individual project might be replicatable in other projects along the river. So kind of similar to what I mentioned about the VFW site in Millbury, like, okay, if we work on that, is there something that we could learn about the design of an access that could then be used on other sites? Thinking about projects that might have multiple benefits, where it's both about access and also restoration and also maybe dams. So just like where to couple these. Feasibility is a big part. Just understanding that having local willing partners and champions is going to be key to moving this work forward. So which projects are most feasible? And then also thinking about geographic distribution and how we might want to select projects, at least, make sure that we have one from the upper, middle, and lower. And so that was like kind of how we were beginning to think through it. And then we went through our own just internal exercise of just saying, okay, like if these are the criteria, like how do we then look at these different projects and understand them and how they line up with those different objectives? And like I said, this isn't about us like, okay, this will give us the answer, but more just helping us to understand and question some of the projects that we might be assuming should move forward. And so we created this matrix, and what you'll see on the upper kind of level right here is those different criteria that I just laid out. And on the left, what you'll see are the different projects that we just walked through or just spoke through. And then just we went through the process, and this is, some of this was a bit more objective and some of it was more subjective in terms of how we began to fill it out. But essentially, what we did was we went through and said, okay, 1 being the lowest and 3 being the highest, understanding how did the different projects play out in terms of where and how they met the different kind of criteria that had been established. And this is kind of the first pass at it. Like I said, some of this we are still questioning some of the numbers that we put in there. We're like, is that really a 2 or should that be a 3 or should it be a 1? So this isn't at all meant to be final, but more just helping us understand our own thought process. And so where things landed with this was some projects like Uxbridge and Woonsocket and the Pratt Dam kind of came to the top as, meeting a lot of these different criteria. And then there's just some things that we recognized were like, hey, like there's some of these projects that we kind of think are going to move forward no matter what. Like there are, like, for example, the Pratt Dam and or at least the Superfund site, like that's just a project that is going to move forward. Like we are actively moving it forward because of the timeliness right now of that project. Other ones like the kind of the access at Sutton just feels like it's kind of like, okay, it's timely right now because we have champions that are like ready to go, right? So maybe it didn't rank so high, but so this is the moment where like, oh, well, maybe there's a weightedness to it. Maybe there's like a timely kind of criteria, or maybe there's like the local champions should rise to the top, because we know somebody's local that'll help move this work forward. And so just kind of thinking through all that. And then we also went through our own kind of gut check internally of like, okay, what are the projects that internally with the collaborative and kind of my team, like which projects were rising to the top in terms of which ones are going to, which ones we think have the greatest priority. And then which ones are also, like I said, moving forward, right? So I think, for example, there's some projects that are moving forward almost independently of this process. And so, for example, Granite Park is an example where it's like that project is like, it's John, you're doing a great job with the momentum on that. And like, I plan to continue to support that work, but maybe it's not one that we spend tons of work with in terms of NIFWIF on because we're kind of separately moving that forward. And so these were kind of our gut check of like projects we felt like didn't have kind of this external momentum, but that we could kind of jump in and kind of help advance as part of the NIFWIF work. And then here on the right, we also have projects that came up from the steering committee conversation that we had in June. And there was definitely, a couple areas that rose to the top there. And so that was like kind of interesting. I would say this was kind of like just an experiment of like, oh, let's think through this. Let's think about, what are the different criteria? How does that measure up with the different projects that we're thinking about? And then what I would love to kind of talk through now and just open up for a more general conversation is like, both this explanation of why some top projects weren't chosen, which is what I meant, which is like, which I just said, which is like about timing, or there's also these parallel efforts that are already taking place and that, we'll continue to support and plug in with as part of, those ongoing efforts. Thinking about, would love to get any feedback on like that prioritization criteria. Like, do those seem like the right criteria that we should be using? What criteria are we missing? Should they be weighted? Is it even helpful, to kind of have a criteria matrix? Maybe it is just for our own process of understanding why certain areas we might move forward with. Any thoughts? I'd love to get any feedback on projects that kind of rose to the top, either through, questions that you all might have of like, okay, why did those ones rise to the top in the matrix? Or why did you all think those ones deserve priority? Or, and then any other projects that you all think we should be considering as part of this work that we haven't talked through? And then finally, one of my hopes is that, that we could at least agree, maybe we don't come up with a 5 today, but that we're all like, oh, okay, well, we don't know all 5, but we do feel like these 3 projects should move forward at least, because my hope coming out of this is that we get some direction from you all, because we want to be moving into this next phase where we're able to zoom into some of these areas, because we're not going to be able to do all of the areas just given the budget that we have as part of the NIFWIF grant. And so are there any of these that we're like, yes, let's move forward with Worcester, or like, yes, this project rises to the top? Or I think on some of these, it's also like, well, we really can't move forward on this until we find out more about that. So that's also totally okay. So, and then just kind of where we're going next, just so everybody knows, is that in the final document that we're creating, we will have each of these municipal areas where we have a spread in the final document that talks about access. We'll probably summarize some of the previous reports, some of the key findings that came out of the previous reports, what some of the things that we then are considering as part of this. So every municipality will still have essentially what we've developed for the conversation today and mapped out and drawn, not developed any further though than what we're kind of doing today. And so each municipality will have that, but then we will be choosing 5 in order to go to that next level of detail. And that's what we're hoping to get your feedback on today. And so we would have, essentially this kind of bigger plan. Right now, this is just placeholder text. So if you're wondering why you can't understand it, it's because it doesn't make sense. And then this is, kind of zoom into each project area and every municipality in order to then be able to talk about parcels and ownership and opportunities. So that's where we're heading. But I think, right now, I just love any kind of questions, thoughts. What are the criteria? Are we missing criteria? Should they be weighted? Should we just use it, maybe not in order to choose sites, but just to understand why certain sites we are considering them priority sites. So yeah, I'll stop talking and just open it up to questions, thoughts, anything that folks have about thinking through this process.
Does this match what you thought it was going to be today? Were there certain expectations or things that you feel like we should be talking about that we aren't, or?
I'm sorry, I might have missed it, but is this slide on like that board, or is there I just can't read it on my on my computer.
No, it's not on the Miro board, but we could definitely share it with you after. But I don't know, Heather, if you have any thoughts on I don't know if you kind of could see the criteria that I just talked through, if that made sense. We could also happy to share the presentation afterwards if you want time to sit with it and look at it in more detail.
Yeah, I always feel like I have to digest it a little bit.
Totally. There's a lot of information that we just went through. And I think it's one of the things with this project is that we're like so in it with our heads. And so just, I know it's challenging to kind of jump in this way. So but what we can do is we can put this onto the Miro board, and the Miro board can serve also as a way for anybody to and also the link to this presentation so that everybody can spend more time digesting it and providing feedback after the call today.
I do like the way you prioritize though, because I feel like there's so many little things to look at. It's hard to keep everything in your head when you're trying to figure this out.
And I think what we need to do here, and something that is not being captured so well in just the matrix, is like some of the, because right now what doesn't make sense is that there are some things that are not showing up. For example, in our teams, like top projects are like a check. And that's like, for example, like Granite Park, like that is like super important project, right? But it's not showing up there because like John's doing awesome work moving that forward. So like, I think we almost need to like annotate it in some ways, or like figure out some way to capture the reasoning behind that. And yeah, we can figure out how to do that moving forward. But I guess what I would love to hear from you all is like, I feel like the Worcester access seems to be a project that, shows up kind of high here. Woonsocket is something that definitely came up high on the matrix, also came up during the conversation. and might be one of those projects that benefits from us doing, kind of a little bit more detailed design in order to be able to provide that vision. So those to me feel like two projects. I feel like Millbury also, because of that opportunity for us to provide like a kind of typical access point design, that also feels like one that's rising to the top. So those are three projects that I feel like we could jump into like kind of immediately, and start working on. And then we could also figure out, then are there other projects, that are here that we think should move forward. And I think, like for example, like Lincoln Cumberland, it came up high on the kind of overall ranking that's part of the matrix. And for our team, like we didn't rank it high because it's like that's happening no matter what, So I think that we just need to figure out how to. I don't think right now we're doing a good job of capturing that. So anyways, but I'd be curious to hear from you all, like if we think about like moving forward with like Worcester and Woonsocket, maybe Grafton, and are there ones that people feel strongly, or I guess the question is like, how should we make this final decision of what to move forward with?
And also thinking about the deliverables, like the Millbury deliverable is like a draft plan basically of like, this is this exact access point and how you put it in, which you could use other places. Whereas the Grafton one is like, this is a really zoomed out thing throughout this community of how do you connect these spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Judy?
Yeah, I was thinking what you were saying about the criteria themselves and potentially waiting, and I sort of had two thoughts. I was wondering, excuse me, sorry, if you wanted to add to the criteria something like communities where you have ready partners.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If that's something that would be beneficial to the
Yeah.
whole prioritization process. And the other thing was, I was thinking that, weighting the criteria might not be a bad idea because
Mm-hmm.
some of them seem to rise to the top. Are they feasible?
Mm-hmm.
Are there multiple benefits? I don't know, maybe I'll throw out connecting to existing goals, something like that. I'm just wondering if some of those criteria just seem to be a little more critical than others, and maybe they should be weighted.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think the question about willing partners, like right now we have it captured underneath general like feasibility, but I agree that I think that it's one that is coming up high enough that maybe we want to think about whether or not it wants to be pulled out separately, specifically around that kind of weighting question. But it's interesting because I feel like there's some places where having those willing partners feels like, okay, that's great, let's move that project forward. And then there's other places like I'm thinking about Woonsocket where it's like, well, we don't have willing partners, but maybe there's an opportunity there where if we did put some design energy into that, we could get some willing partners to come on board, right? And so I think and that's why I feel like this matrix is helpful just to help us think through things, not to, and like I said before, like not to have it actually make the decisions for us, but just to help us understand the different factors and why we might be choosing certain things. So
yeah.
And if these look familiar to anybody that has been part of the collaborative for a while, this was influenced or sort of started by a 2021 conversation that we had back when the collab started, thinking about how do we rank projects and how do we prioritize things. And exactly what you said, the multiple benefits and feasibility were the top two priorities for the group when we had those conversations. We said, think about all these things, but those are the big ones that really like are determining factors. And the feasibility is a lot, like you mentioned. I mean, we're thinking about, can we permit it? Is it technically feasible? Do we have the capacity to make it happen, or does somebody else? And are there willing partners?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of different projects, I'm circling like I feel like Pawtucket, at least some aspects of Pawtucket, like the Granite Park is moving forward, but the other aspects of it, like the access, aren't necessarily. And so I think that's a question of whether that feels like that itself wants to be a separate, kind of one to move forward. But I do feel like the Worcester access, Millbury access, Grafton, Lonsdale Marsh, Woonsocket, those to me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, seem to be 5 that are, for me in my mind, like, and that is once again, this kind of question of whether or not where that comes from, of like why it seems like those are the right ones to move forward with. I do feel like Manville, in some ways, at least the conversation on Sycamore Landing, John, you and I can move that project forward separately from the kind of NIFWIF. But I don't know. But then I guess the question of like Blackstone, where does Blackstone fall in that? Because that's one that feels like a connection. I think Sutton is one that we feel like is already moved forward or moving forward. So I think the exciting part is that, like, in a lot of ways, we can cover a lot of these, by either existing in kind of momentum on projects. I think the question is, like, is Uxbridge, Uxbridge scored high in the matrix. But maybe it's just that in my mind that I'm like, it hasn't come up to the top in my mind, but does that feel like one that folks feel like should be a priority? I don't know if any of you all work in that area. Like the Northbridge and Uxbridge are a bit more, the kind of wild segments of the river.
I know we're basically at time here.
Yeah.
We have a quiet group, but sorry for potentially overwhelming you. You're welcome to sit with us and come back to us and give us feedback, but now you at least know what's in our brains, and in really real time. We've been working on this like up to the last second of trying to figure it out and put it together and wrap our own brains around it. So if you want to talk, if you want to have an individual conversation, please reach out. I think that, it's helpful to kind of go through this and even think about how our work has been impactful so far. Like Millbury's having all these conversations around access because we started the conversations around access, right? So even if we stopped working on this today, I think that they would continue moving forward. Sutton already went through their own permitting process to improve everything happening at Tri-Village Parks or Tri-Centennial Park. So there's a lot that we've sort of helped influence already, which is really, really exciting to sort of see that impact early. And I think that that'll just continue moving forward, whether it's through other organizations or through the collaborative. But we appreciate your time joining us today and giving us what feedback you have. Feel free to follow up with us, and we'll see you at our next steering committee meeting in October.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a lot of information we just shared. And so I think the main thing is like, if there's any red flags, like that's like the main thing that I would love any feedback on, like red flags of like, no, the process you're going through doesn't make sense, or these sites just don't even, whatever. So, so just feel free to reach out to Steph or I, if anything comes up, or if there's other people who you think we should be reaching out to. But otherwise we'll probably circle back, and we're going to start working on the ones that make sense to immediately start working on. And so for those of you working on the river, we might reach out as we start to move some of those individual municipal scale projects forward. So
thanks, everybody.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Stay cool
Bye.
today. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.